Hello again. As I'm sure most of us know, the BBC has a self-appointed mission to promote multiculturalism and indoctrinate young people with the idea that Britain has, since the Stone Age, been full of various visible minorities. Sometimes this is amusing, and others annoying. They've gone rather astray though in their latest efforts on this front. Whenever anybody dares to suggest that Britain was almost entirely a homogenous white nation until well into the years after the end of the Second World War, somebody is sure to say something along the lines of, oh, but there was a black community in Cardiff years before then. Perhaps they'll go on to mention Tiger Bay and Shirley Bassey, or the so-called race riots in the city in 1919. All this, it is suggested, proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that there have always been black communities in England and Wales. Because the BBC are always keen on putting forward this thesis, they picked up on the fact that the Glamorgan archives had some old photographs from Cardiff, and they were trying to find the people shown in the photographs. The BBC were quick to do a piece about it and put it on their website, which I give a link to in the description to this video. They published it on the website on Saturday, and it was headed Butte Town, search to find people in photos from Cardiff docks past. Okay, the story was about a cache of photographs taken in a part of Cardiff known as Butte Town between 1900 and 1920. They wanted to see if they could track down the relatives of any of the people in the pictures, which showed some black and mixed race children. Proof positive that there was a thriving black community in Britain a century ago. Alas, no, not really. The photographer who took these pictures was based in Butte Street. This was the heart of Butte Town, which, together with the docks, made up Tiger Bay. How many black people were living there a century ago? Were black and Asian families really living in Cardiff in great numbers at that time? Let's look at one or two facts which the BBC didn't bother to check. The first thing to see is that the supposed community actually consisted of, in the early years of the 20th century, not families with children generally, but single people. The black sailors came ashore between ships and they lived in lodging houses in that part of Cardiff. And then after a couple of weeks, a month or two at most, they jumped on another ship and they disappeared. The black population was constantly changing. Of course, there were families, but now we come to another point which the BBC either did not know or chose not to mention. Butte Town, where those photographs were taken, was what is euphemistically known as a red light district at that time. I give a link in the description to this video to a PhD thesis about this very subject, prostitution in Butte Town in the early 20th century. The prostitution was run by both Maltese and black pimps. This was not an area in which any ordinary family would wish to live and raise children. How many black people were there in Cardiff at that time? First, how many black people are there now in Cardiff? It's famous for being multicultural and diverse, and if we think about the fact that currently between 3 and 4% of people in England and Wales are black, we might be able to put the matter in perspective. Have a guess what the figure is for Cardiff, which is famous for having been so mixed for so long. Okay, the general population of England and Wales, say 4%. In fact, just 1.3% of the population of Cardiff consists of black people, which is only about a third of the national average. There's very few black people in Cardiff, even now, a tiny number. If we assume that it was far smaller before the waves of immigration arrived in Britain in the last 50 or 60 years, and it's only 1.3% now, I think it's fair to assume that the number of black people in Cardiff a century ago was vanishingly small. I think too that it's probably the case that most of the mixed race children at that time were likely to have been the product of liaisons between white prostitutes and black sailors. This is certainly where most of the children like that around the London docks came from 100 years ago and more. The truth is that until the 1950s and 1960s, there was a very, very small number of black people in Britain, and in general it was a shifting and transient population. The constant efforts being made now to alter the past and demonstrate that settled black communities existed in the country as far back as the Middle Ages are not really plausible. Despite this, I suspect strongly that within 20 or 30 years, 40 at the most, the fantasy would have become established as fact, because those who actually remember how life was in those days would have died out by then.